Welcome, everyone. All right, so let's get started, shall we? I am happy to be here with Monica Mody. I'm Sundari Johansen. I'm core faculty in the Women's Spirituality program, and I'm happy to be here with Monica Mody. And I'll just say a bit about her to introduce her, and then and then we'll get started with a bit of a reading, and then we have a bit of a conversation to have about the work. So Dr. Monica Mody is a poet, scholar, and educator working at the intersections of liminal knowing and language, earth medicine, and decolonial frameworks of wholeness. She is the author of the full-length collection Bright Parallel from Copper Coin, the cross-genre Kalapani, 1913 press, and 3 chapbooks, including Ordinary Annals, Above Ground Press. Her poetry has won awards, including the Sparks Prize, the Zora Neale Hurston Award, and the Toto Award, and can be found in numerous international journals and anthologies. Her academic writing has been published in Tarka Journal, the Transformative Power of Art Journal, The Land Remembers Us, Women, Myth, and Nature, and Integral Review. She holds a PhD in East-West Psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies and an MFA in Creative Writing from the University of Notre Dame. Her doctoral dissertation was selected for the Correa Award for Best Dissertation in Women and Mythology, conferred by the Association for the Study of Women Mythology. Dr. Mody is a core professor in the Mythological Studies program at Pacifica Graduate Institute and also teaches as an adjunct professor with CIIS in women's spirituality. You can learn more about her at drmonicamody.com, and we will be sharing both her website as well as a website to order her wonderful book of poetry. So welcome, Dr. Monica Mody, and I invite you to read a few of your poems to start with, and then we can go from there.
Thank you, Sundari, for the welcome. Thank you, CIIS Women's Spirituality, for this invitation. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be a part of your 30th anniversary celebrations. It's very exciting 30 years of the program, and I am, very grateful to be a part of, this celebration. So in the beginning, I'll be, reading 6 of my poems, and I'll be interspersing them with a little bit of like a background and talking a little bit about the poems. And then Sundari and I will have a little short conversation. And then, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for a Q&A as well. So in case you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat now or later too. So let's launch into a poem. Flash invocation. That I exist only as a speck on your bloodshot eyes, but I am willing to sweat. Ancestors, when I see the least, I am closest to you. That I have forgotten to praise you, but without this praise and this knowing, I am nothing. That sleep runs like sweat off of my face, and awake, I am inviting you to come visit me. Come visit me and make my heart hospitable. Make my heart soft and fierce. Make it so alive that any animal that wanders in would know its home. So I wanted to begin with this poem for a couple of different reasons. One is because I do conceive of this as an invocation to the ancestors, as a way to call them in our midst, as a way to call the ancient presences in our midst. And what better way to start anything than, with that connection remembered. But the other reason is also because, when I was imagining the ancestors in this poem, the ancestors did not come from a pure, unblemished position. The ancestors had bloodshot eyes. And I'll let that image stay with you, right? But for me, this is what's possible in the realm of poetry, in the zone of poetry. We can speak about trouble. We can speak about our troubled pasts, and we can speak about our troubled presence. And right now, there are many theaters of war and conflict surging around the world. And there's one in particular which is really present in the news and in the collective imagination. And that's one place where that ancestral trauma has continued, right? And so when we think of the ancestors with bloodshot eyes, it's remembering that those legacies of trauma are ours, and the task of healing is our responsibility. And how do we make our heart fierce and soft and hospitable all at once? One question I tend to in my poetry is, how do I sing of the trouble? How do I sing of the pain? But how do I move from that to something that is part of a bigger connection, that is part of our vaster connection, which is again part of our legacy, right? Like we are we are living in a world which is alive and sentient. And again, some of you may be approaching this through your own art, and some of you may be approaching it through your scholarship, but the ways in which we have been cut off from these legacies of vast belonging are also part of colonization, imperialism, like all the systems and structures that have dissociated us from remembering who we are. So the other thing that I want to try and do in my poetry, is to link back to these sources of wisdom and to the streams that are flowing continually, remembering that these stream beds are not dry, the stream beds are alive and flowing, right? So this second poem that I'm going to share with you is called Deep Ear to Ground. And flowers growing like fingers into sky, beckoning. A heart comes out of sky, as blue as love, with skein of tremors opening its eye to us. And heart sees heart like a beckoning, like furred cheek meeting in sorrow, in trance, like roundness of drops from eye imprinted with flowers and all that is moving on earth, like current moving in water, that is body, that is wind and sound that wind makes, that is bird calls you can hear. And all forms collect here on this ground. Ancestors beam their love at us. Ancestors like milk running on our faces. And sound cups our faces and drinks us in. Sounds breath. We are breathing. We are elemental of deep inhabiting. E in flame, head thrown back. Like birds. When ash falls from our tongues, its own breeze calls out, and we smile like morning about to sing itself into existence. I flip over an old leaf, and in its venation, a name, mine. Love crawls like an infant. What was said was a name spell, and leaf asked me to unhide. Who wrote us into leaves? Who can read us? Who held apart mouth of caves so we could enter like bears? Who called out to glyphs of light on walls of cave? Who filled our eyes with charcoal to see pain of others, of heart, of tiger? Who planted rice medicine, salt medicine, seed medicine? Whose songs tipped with metal of ash line our mouths? Who hears these songs? Who wrote them into existence? You live on wire like birds. Your old souls see us in the head, in the bead of your eye. And thus unto wisdom we climb fences of our heart and wave. In that vast ocean, Sheshnag uncoils. A time came when this was all that mattered. So, there's many thematic clusters in the collection, and I'm looking forward to talking more about this with Sundari a little later. But something that is also really present and is running are the histories of violence on the land. And I'm bringing that up again because, I was really, tuning into what's happening around us right now. And the poem that I want to share with you next, it was written keeping in mind, and it was written for Kashmir, which is, another theater of war, another place where there's been a lot of state-led violence happening for decades. And there's been attrition of lives, there's been ways in which civilians are impacted by what is going on, by political violence. So again, Kashmir is known as, or was known in the imaginary of the poets of Kashmir as a paradise on earth, right? So I am like in this poem, I'm really talking about these themes, and how does a poem become a space where it can hold all of that? This poem is Red Rides Up Your Arm. India continued, lost. All mornings are this. Call to prayer and thin carpet of voices. They call out to you, but strange effect. Land's gun making strange gurgles in your head. And beyond troubled paradise lives a river. Smoke a river, and blue in your throat fogs, time as precious as half-hidden paradise. Each call takes us to a tall tower, throne, dying, cackling, strange, whirling all its own. Miracle lives in your breast and tries to sing. It is not tears. This language bears a hollow where land used to live. Your mouth is open as a sewer, and they are rushing in with their stories. This consciousness of this language, bare as a rock on which you see someone sitting. She wears a ragged sheet too thin for stories. What sifts upward is of thinnest gruel, and thirst is yet big in your eyes, dry, something wet around your eyes. Single yellow flower, flat, offered in a gesture you don't quite trust. There's something of bereavement along your temples. Images you wear around your mathapati, words whose eyes seek to see. too transparent for a tongue that vanishes like all the bodies. Something I really began, connecting with in the course of my studies, my graduate studies at CIIS, and then in the course of writing my PhD dissertation, was the impact on women, right? Like, and also specifically on women who are often understood as, or called by different names that refer to them being wise women, right? Like the wise women, the witches, right? Like, and so there is a particular word that is used that comes from Britain, cunning, right? Like cunning women. And the word cunning goes back to Old Norse. Its roots go back to Old Norse, and it means knowing, knowledge, right? Like, so the woman who knows, the woman who knew, right? Like, that's the cunning woman. And again, as part of a lot of the ways in which not just the state violence and the political violence, but social violence was enacted was by literally wiping out the direct access that we as human beings, and women in particular, had to something much vaster, to the divine, to the sacred, right? So that, like, direct contact, which allows you to move beyond schisms, allows you to move beyond all the ways in which we are divided and split. So the cunning women knew that, right? And they're the ones who were silenced, and they're the ones, this attempt was to silence them. Hopefully they're not all silenced, but their bodies were also, like, drawn into this. So this poem is called Cunning Woman. And it's an attempt to tune into the song, to the women's song. That which is cunning sleeps in my stomach. I move mesmerized to water. Something clearer than glass communicates with me. All the flowers raise their heads, slipping inside truth, changing its long-sleeved gown, finally wearing it eligible. Betrayal. As I lie in arena, stunned, they lift my jewels one by one off me. Someone slides a finger into my vagina. Someone bites my breast. Someone pulls my hair. My eye bruises. Under my hip bruises. Distance is acute in my chest. I fling a knot of words to catch stars. Are there only patriarchs in the sky? The story of women is, there's a lot of violence in here, and I'm going to share one story which brings in some of that, like, the legacies of, like, collective and familial violence in South Asia in particular. And this is the story of the imagined story of my grandmother, but also there's a lot of love, right? Like, within our motherline. And this is why we want to connect to our motherlines. And Naomi Ruth Lewinsky, of course, like, talks about the motherlines as the memories of feminine power and energy, right? Like, something that, like, keeps us rooted and grounded into the ways we can still stay earth connected and connected to, the ones who came before and the ones who came after. So I wrote this next poem as an epistolary poem. It's a poem written as though my grandmother, my Nani, my maternal grandmother was writing to me. It's called Nani's letter. Granddaughter, when I was 14, I crossed 14 rivers, walked to every village that fell under Big Mountain's shadow, knocking on the door of every medicine woman that knew the mountain rock as her own altar, passing a message, trick of safety, ruse to rouge, unmistakable into ordinariness. They hid their medicine in the rocks of Big Mountain. Kohe Suleiman stilled, growing graver still as it took the medicine in its safekeeping. Until beckoned by time, signaled to return, trees were to remember, elder women to keep vigil. Women were cut down, trees passed, poison flowed, and yet soil remembers, stones remember. The medicine is yours to claim if you choose. Every woman shed blood on earth in a sigil her daughters would activate. When I crossed into your grandfather's threshold, women wailed behind me. I would continue to hear them, cameos of sundown shadows around my feet. Twilight suited me. Standing in the courtyard, I would wear crimson like a beacon, colors of the setting sun weaving rich geometric shapes around me, particles of dust lacing through pink air. No instrument was necessary to tell me when to step out, to send off the day. I would light my lamp and wait for my farmer. Once, barely 2 years into our marriage, he brought me a whole panicle of mangoes. The unripe I left out for the crows. I let myself be endeared, let myself swoon into the care with which he picked and brought each fruit home. The day your grandfather brought home the dying child, I set aside my day's work. One by one, I picked out red chilies blazing in the child's eyes, placing them on a thali where they smoked. Soon, smoke drew in the entire village. People huddled at the door, tense with uncertainty, with fear. It was the visitor's eyes that first showed me the madness that would overtake our land one day. Friends would turn to enemies. Neighbors kill each other. Girls and children would be raped. Boys would have chilies thrown in their eyes. I did not sleep that night. I slept, timelines undulated, intersected. I thought I could free my children from pain of memories. I asked their dreams to take memories away, fill their eyes, dreams embroidered with gold thread of possibility. I have always flickered between my two names, Rupa, life's intelligence made of beauty. Buddhan, wisdom growing like vine. Women continued to gather every full moon night, night fire beckoning, feet slipping away from the known village. We who lived with keenness, marrow song splitting in our veins, found our drumbeat, drum dance. From one, we split into three, walked in three worlds, feet tracing center of cosmos with every footfall. Energy pouring from lotus skin, alighting to birth new geometries of existence. We returned with howl of morning wind, gold veins in our feet popping from our travel between dimensions, peacock feathers in eyes. When we began to forget, silence between us stretched, thick and wool. We whispered to each other the secret of remembering. This was our trick, brick by brick, building again the bridge to rainbow unknowns. I dreamt of you, granddaughter. the granddaughter I would never see and come to know. I wove you a marriage chadar. I wove you a coronet of butterflies, dun-colored warmth of swarm from a high desert. I danced with you. Under the stars, child, I howled for you. Howled my love for my 3 children, howled my love for my husband, howled my love for grandmothers in my blood. I sat under the page of the book you would one day write, tongue swelling with stories. I wanted you to find me, be your own vessel of truth, my love, for you to deepen a groove to fit what you know you would be. And finally, I want to share an excerpt from a poem that's called "The Witch on My Grandmother's Mountain." So the historical event that the poem refers back to, the previous poem, Nani's letter, refers to, is the partition of India, and my mom lost her mother when she was 2. And so, this became sort of like a preoccupation for me again, like connecting with, my grandmother, but learning everything about her. So while I was doing research about the village that she came from, like they were in, before the partition of India, Dera Ghazi Khan, I found this one entry in Wikipedia, which was, the entry said something like, another legend states that the witch Tushita currently lives in the mountains of Suleiman. And so I became enamored with Tushita. I looked and looked and looked, and I consider myself a really good researcher. And I didn't find anything about Tushita except this one sentence that kept recurring everywhere in 50 places. And I was like, wow. So I wrote this long poem. It's a 10-page poem for Tushita, remembering Tushita, really, Gloria Anzaldúa calls it like remythologizing, right? But also like, wow, we can invoke something into existence when we write about it, right? So I wanted to really connect with Tushita and the motherline energies. And interestingly enough, a few months after my dissertation came out, I was invited to give a poetry reading in Oakland, and I went and looked at the Wikipedia entry again after that. All mention of Tushita had vanished from the internet. It was very fascinating. It was almost as though, she appeared. So anyway, I'm sharing a little excerpt so that you come to know Tushita with me. Tushita, you are alone on the mountain, the very image of a woman in power. You and elements in primal conversation, wind-whipped hair, words from your mouth invoke, and herbs on seed walk spell love. Behind mountain, crow lifts her head. Far away, a village burns. You wrap a word in wind fibers, send it off to call rain. Late one night, bundled, a baby comes, a new being. And before this child is snagged by shrilling claws of patriarchy, you draw a mark of protection on her forehead, ready to burst into flame when she is willing to remember all that she is. This child will not live numb, power petrified in your heart, you tell yourself. You have seen too much and are sometimes afraid. You keep doing your job, partnered with something older than fear. You're never alone on the mountain. Chronologies fly out of your mouth, each timeline like a bird. Some you have already mourned, seeing the dust they would become. Your name lives on in filaments of wind, swollen within pollen like eye of eagle, wrapped in vision, wrapped in yarn. Stones narrate selves woven young and older, barometer of who you have been. You swing easily between age flaking off your foot. Too much called out for your care. Yours was not the luxury to lose yourself in meditation long enough for ants to build hills. You knew those ants, their hills, dirt that made the hills. They knew you. You breathed in trees. You were in relation. Relation is reciprocity with flowers growing out of heart of hill into open palms of etheric wave, their real and essence. You bend your face even now to whiff flowers, drop into your heart, sense oneness laced under skin. The old of the old, when mountain walked around, silver anklets on feet, mountain remembers patter of rain and myths. Each myth wrapped in breath, scattered like shuck across mountain, secret flame seed. Grasscroppers find it sometimes, goats find it, mountain dreams it. Flame seeds have eyes, see all pasts, all futures. To stop right here.
Thank you so much. I was really hoping you would read that poem, and it's obviously much longer, but just wonderful, wonderful poem. So I'm so glad that you included it. Thank you so much for sharing some of your poetry. I wanted to direct folks again, if you would like to get a copy of this book of poetry. If you've liked what you've heard here, you probably will want to read the rest. You can go to the links that V has posted to find out how to order the book. So let's have a bit of a conversation about some of just about your work and sort of where it comes from, and how you build your work, and the references that are in some of it. So for example, there's a clear spiritual thread that's very personal, very feminine, and has many different dimensions running through your work. And I would love to, you've already talked about some of this. I'd love to hear a bit more about that, and sort of how you weave these things into your work, and where a lot of that comes from.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting because I started seriously writing poetry. I was, writing poetry like young people everywhere do, right? But then I seriously started writing poetry in 2003, 2004. I lived in Delhi at the time. And I feel like I have gone through many different seasons within my poetry. So there were things that I was interested in there when I lived in Delhi, and then then I came to the US to do an MFA in poetry, and I became very interested in international avant-garde poetries, and so my in some ways what I was interested in was shifted. And then I came to CIIS and EW, where the whole where in some ways it was, I came because I needed to allow myself to welcome the spirituality and soul more into my life, right? So like and in some ways none of these influences ever go away, but even in Bright Parallel, the poems in the second half of the book connect more with what I came to embrace towards the latter half of my PhD. And, the poems in the first half are more grappling a lot with death and rebirth and transformation, right? Like in different ways. And the role of language and the role of the poets, and what do we do when, the world is posing such big questions in front of us, right? I feel like, and yeah, in that sense, it's all part of a spiritual quest, whatever you call it. But the spiritual quest is not all, it doesn't look one way. It can, as we grow older, as we grow through different things in our lives, that looks differently. So, but for me, I think I was much less able to be vulnerable about all of this in earlier. And I think now there is a way in which I do step in and allow myself to connect different dimensions in my poetry. And yeah, so and it's also very connected to my scholarship, right? Because as someone who is opening herself to the theories offered by so many amazing theorists, again, many of whom are like taught within women's spirituality, but like even otherwise, like there's a way in which I am continuing to ask questions, right? Like, and so it's spirituality, but it's also curiosity, and sometimes it's just like visitation, right? Like language visits you, or an image visits you, or like a story visits you. Like Tushita visited me, right? Like, and I had to do something with her, and then she vanished. She's like, now you have the poem, now I can leave. Yeah.
Yeah, like the genius coming out of the walls of the home to enter for inspiration and then leaving, in Greek mythology.
Yeah.
Greek and Roman mythology.
Different mythologies have,
Yeah.
the genius differently, right? Like,
Yeah. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about you mentioned this connection to land and place and environment, and the earth. And there's also this deep ancestral connection in this work that sort of moves and grows throughout the course of the book, and throughout as the poems go along, sort of deepening and exploring these different aspects. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to those things and maybe the connections between them.
Yeah. So I come to this country from India, right? Like I was born in a little town called Ranchi. And the interesting thing is even within my family and both sides of my family, there's been a lot of like travel and migration, right? So that sense of like movement and home, I see themselves as like twin aspects in some ways, right? And of course, so when I first started, like the early poems in Bright Parallel have a different relationship to India and the question of home, right? And then later on it shifts. It's actually the early questions are more interested almost in a political understanding, and the later on it becomes a quest to understand India more mythically, but not mythically as in because again, India has many, like a lineage of many patriarchal mythologies, right? Like patriarchal traditions of mythologies, right? But like a different way of stepping into that, which did allow me, which for me, like this latter conception is very rooted in our vaster belonging to earth and to our interconnectedness with all of life. And in some ways it does derive very specifically from my spiritual studies, because alongside my PhD, I was also studying with many other teachers, right? Like I studied for a few years with Dr. Malidoma Some in the West African Dagra tradition. I also did a lot of like ritual and ceremony and like magical work with, like, for instance, Starhawk and the reclaiming tradition, and Louisa Teach, and many other teachers, many indigenous teachers. So for me, like a lot of it is about like again, like this idea of the earth as alive, right? Like, and that it's not something I could speak about in that way openly in my scholarship in that way, but like in my poetry I could allow again, a far older notion of India, because again, we often, many of you might have heard, India is seen as, this ancient land of wisdom, right? Like it's, and Sundari, I know you've done so much tremendous like studies connecting with some traditions that come out of India, some philosophical traditions that come out of India, right? And it is true. And at the same time, having grown up there, I had a very complicated relationship with many of these traditions, and especially in the exclusionary ways they acted against women, against Dalits, against tribals, right? Like indigenous people. So for me, all of it kind of like was placed into one cauldron where I was like creating some sort of a rapprochement with India, but like doing it not just through like a materialist lens, but like almost like a mythic cross transcultural, also earth-rooted way, which for me is connected to ancient wisdom, which is embedded in all of us. The capacity to remember that connection is in all of us. So yeah, like in that sense, that's where I think I revitalized my connection with India, with land, and also yeah, it's here, right? Like, and I'm an immigrant here in this country, and this country has its own legacies of dispossession and alienation of the indigenous people. So that actually comes into my I talk about more of that in my second poetry collection, which is coming out in January. But like I'm able to, like, now that I've done that, like, I mean, reconciliation is always an ongoing process, right? But now that I've opened myself a little more to that connection with India, I feel like I can like explore my positionality as an immigrant much more. So that those are poems that are part of my second collection or third collection, but which is next collection. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And that's there's so much when I was reading your book, I got such a sense of embodiment, like being in the body as being a really important piece of there's a sense in reading a lot of these of really being in the body and in a very embodied place, and that being a place of power and vulnerability. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that as well. And I think after this, we'll open it up for Q&A.
Yeah. So I, for several years, I actually danced at least once a week. For me, 5 rhythms was part of my regular practice. I would take any burning questions I had about my dissertation on the floor, like it was a place where I could like really, again, tend to what was emerging for me intellectually, but also it became a practice that allowed me to somatically liberate myself from a lot of, growing up, having grown up in a small town, there were all these expectations placed upon me of how a woman is supposed to be and how she's supposed to like hold herself in the world. Like what is somatic entrainment with which we negotiate our boundary with the world. And even though, I was in Delhi for 5 years and I was very, very much a part of like feminist queer collectives and communities and very much thinking through all of this, but that was not through a spiritual lens. That was very much through like a left, secular, like post-colonial feminist lens, which was all about rejecting tradition and rejecting, spirituality in some ways, because spirituality was seen as something that was regressive, right? So then this new somatic inhabiting came from a different place where I could, like I was again rethinking my relationship with language, but it was, when I say rethinking, it was not just happening here. It did feel like that kind of like a restructure and reorganizing happened. like throughout my body. And I don't have that practice anymore right now, you know, and it's fine, because I feel like, yeah, those several years of that, like wow, like really moving into the body and moving with the body in a different way allowed me to take up space and language in again a very felt, sensory, yeah, earth intimate way. So
Great. Well, there's a small dog barking outside, so if anyone it seems to have stopped now, but thank you for sharing that. That's there's such an important, so much of this is so important, and that idea of integrating spirituality. There's a lot of Indian feminist theologians looking to Tantra now, as you know, to sort of reintegrate the spiritual in traditions that have been more open to women's power.
It's happening slowly. Yep.
Slowly, very, very. Yes. Yeah. So I would like to open up do we have any questions from folks in the audience who would like to ask questions or share comments?
The chat has been, thank you so much, Monica, first and foremost. The chat has been very quiet. We just had a question about how to spell Tushita to probably continue the research, and Sundari spelled that for Miss Wanda. I would say if you have a question, maybe unmute yourself, come on screen. Let's hear more spoken word. If you are in position, please unmute yourself, tell us your question.
Yeah, or any felt responses. I was typing in chat, but I can actually speak, so I will just do that. You know, there is Tushita is how with a double E is how I first encountered her on Wikipedia, and of course we're talking about like a different what is it called, script altogether. So transliteration doesn't matter. But interestingly enough, within the Buddhist cosmology, there is actually the notion of Tushita as one of the heavens, which I discovered much later. So again, like Tushita as liberation, right? Like as like one of the heavens, which is connected to our personal spiritual liberation. Annette.
Hello, Monica. Thank you so much for your poetry. It's really so beautiful and powerful. You mentioned the various spiritual traditions that you've studied and more than been exposed to, actually been deeply immersed in. And I was just wondering, how does that interaction and interplay come into your poetry?
I think for a long time, initially, it actually put me in a state of crisis, actually, because, in most of these spiritual traditions, you do not speak lightly. Language is something that's just very, very sacred, right? Like, and like, again, language has this numinosity, it has this potency, right? Like for instance, the idea of ashe in West African tradition, right? Or namo, right? Like, so, and so for a long time, I found it very difficult to write, because I was like feeling the weight of that responsibility, that I couldn't just write anything. It had to really be, tapped into that idea, or not idea, right? Like that energy, like how could I allow myself to really become that vessel, right? Like, and I feel like I went to my head a little bit for a few years. And then, and then I think, yeah. And I also feel like, I think poetry and I have a very old pact. So anytime I think I'm done with poetry, I'm like, I've washed my hands of you. It kind of like knocks on my door a little bit. And it's like, nope. So yeah, at different points actually throughout, I found myself needing to write. And one instance was, for instance, I was taking a class on Jungian psychology and East-West psychology, right? Like, and there's the Bright Parallel has a bunch of myth poems, and all the myth poems were written as I think like part of a project in that class. And then when I was, I finally started conceiving of my dissertation, the conundrum that I was facing, I wanted to bring I thought I would like approach it from a theoretical lens. I was like, oh, I'm going to write about Nomo and Ashe, like it's going to be a very theoretical dissertation. And I wanted to also like break the dichotomy between theory and spirituality, right? But at the same time, that's when it felt like the mothers started tapping. They were like, no, it cannot be written in that way. You have to actually write through this, right? Like you have to move through this. And also, like many other modes of writing, I felt like each poem broke me apart and then reconstituted me, right? Like, so I had to do that. I had to go through that process, but I couldn't do it if I were doing like, nothing against PCC, but a purely PCC kind of a dissertation, right? But I had to move into that that space of the the embodied visionary creativity that poetry allows, so that I could undergo the kind of personal spiritual transformation that would allow the kind of writing to emerge, that would then also I could offer that to the world. So like it couldn't be, I had to be willing to be dismembered. Yeah.
We have Amanda saying, I love the living relationship with poetry. And Sarah asks, I am curious, you mentioned that the Wikipedia page of Tushita disappeared. Why do you think that occurred?
It was not a page, actually, Sarah. It was it was and like my mother's family lived in an area called Dera Ghazi Khan. So and Dera Ghazi Khan is bordered by a mountain called Suleiman, like the Suleiman Mountains. So it was one line. Another legend states that the witch Tushita, it was just that one line that was on the Wikipedia page of the Suleiman Mountains, dedicated to Suleiman Mountains. So again, I don't know why it disappeared. I'm leaning into
the whims of Wikipedia editors.
Sorry, what?
The whims of Wikipedia editors.
Yeah, that's a more prosaic explanation, right? But the interesting thing was that when I was searching for it, I found it in many different places, not just on Wikipedia. And then, all the entries disappeared, except that one line makes it into my poem.
But she's so strong here, of all the things that we brought up and discussed, people like Tushita. She's talking to us.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
There are plenty of other wonderful comments, Monica, as you were reading there. People were really expressing this deep joy and love of your words and your poetry.
Thank you all. I'm scrolling through the comments now. Yeah.
And what I might suggest, if we don't have any further comments, is maybe you could close with the poem.
Good. But I actually want to, okay.
Or maybe you have questions.
Oops, I'm not muted.
No other comments or questions? Right. Part of me is like, we had enough poetry, but it's fine. Alka, yeah.
I can say something, just a comment, just a gratitude. I think I'm probably maybe the only other one here from South Asia. And so just really appreciating the different elements you brought in, and it made me think of, my ancestry and the ancestral traumas that, you know, also come through partition, and the complexities, you know. So I just wanted to say a lot of appreciation for how vivid and poignant your work is. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to read one poem and then begin. And this is the okay, the idea, based on the idea of resonance, right? Like, which is a phenomenon in physics, and yeah, what we're also building here amongst ourselves as part of the interconnected phenomena of being. Resonance. Beloved, rise like a star in the firmament. I am looking for glass pieces that blink their messages at passers-by's feet, wearing preemptive glasses to black out shine. Rhythms of sonic like flatterer, like dream. They have gathered here on this edge, this liminal lip of forest and skin, a tribe of snakes, their underbelly sending and receiving faint buzzing feast of hope into all moments lying before us, here in this present, letting bark unsheathe memory of a present far under skin of earth, they sidewind. Tie my right hand to a post, and you'll see a vein gleaming, gold exposed to the sun. Thank you all so much. Thank you all.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming. And this will be posted to YouTube, I believe. And so if you want to revisit this wonderful poetry, it will be available there. And of course, again, if you would like to learn more about ordering the book, V has posted a couple of websites in the chat, and that would be drmonicamody.com/bright-parallel.html. And there's also a link directly to purchase the book. And I will also hope that we'll put in the description of this video on YouTube a link to the book, so that folks can purchase it if they wish to.
Thank you so much for the beautiful, thoughtful questions you asked, Sundari, and thank you, V, for keeping the chat flowing and thank you all again for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to remind everyone of our next event, which is the keynote address with Minna Salami, author of Sensuous Knowledge, on the 20th. So I hope to see many of you there for that.